A president may sign a treaty with another nation, acting as the official representative of the United States, if and only if 1. The U.S. Senate participates in the development of the treaty, and 2. The U.S. Senate approves the final treaty by at least a 2/3 majority. Now, I didn't make that up. It's in Article 2 of the United States Constitution. It's very clear. It is unambiguous. So, what is a treaty? A treaty is a formal agreement between two or more nations containing terms of trade, peace, alliance, or the like. It's a pact. Oh, it's a pact. A pact is a formal agreement, and it comes from the Latin verb pascisci, meaning to agree, and more specifically from the past participle of that verb being pactus, meaning agreed. A pact is something that nations have agreed to. For almost all of our nation's history, presidents have circumvented this constitutional requirement by entering into what they call executive agreements. Let me get a card here to make this point. Executive agreements, they're a constitutional fiction. There is no such thing. I'm not making it up. Look in the Constitution and see if you can find executive agreements. It doesn't exist. But as I say, presidents throughout our history have wanted to get around the U.S. Senate, so they strike what they call executive agreements. And I'll explain in a little while why the U.S. Senate allows them to do that. An executive agreement, if it's substantial, if it's any kind of formal agreement, it's a treaty. If it isn't, then it's something like the President of the United States telephones the President of Mexico and agrees that they'll have, lunch together in Monterrey. That would be an agreement. But there's no such thing as a formal executive agreement. Well, no such thing as one that is within the rule of constitutional law. During the 19th century, about half of all our international agreements were executive agreements, that is, outside the Constitution. In the 20th century, well over 90% of our international agreements have been called executive agreements, and they are completely outside the Constitution and over 90% of our international agreements have been called executive agreements, and they are completely outside the Constitution and completely outside rule of law. And all the presidents who have engaged in that practice really ought to have been removed by office because they're violating their oath of office to protect and defend and support the Constitution. And they knew they were. So why has it been allowed? It's been allowed because it does a very wonderful thing for political parties. A president is from one political party, and that almost by definition means that a large part of the American public will be very much opposed to anything that president does, and another large part will, due to party loyalty, be very supportive of what that president does. So if a president is allowed to make an executive agreement, a great many of which are quite controversial, it will automatically alienate a large part of the American public and energize another large part of the American public, and that will drive them ever more passionately into partisan political party camps. And the political parties love that. They feed on it. They depend on it. Now, if the Senate, which represents all 50 states and all the people of all 50 states, and has a certain amount of diversity in terms of political philosophies. Now, it has no political party diversity. You know, it's Republican, Democrat. But if the Senate, by a 2/3 majority as required, approved of these executive agreements, which are actually unconstitutional treaties, that would mean at a very large segment of the American public agreed with that treaty, thought it was a pretty good thing, and that would diffuse the division and bitterness that political parties depend on. So the U.S. Senate, which is made up of political party politicians, not representatives of the states or the citizens, not genuine representatives, the members of the U.S. Senate, on behalf of their political parties and their own political career ambitions, they give presidents carte blanche to engage in these executive agreements, knowing that it will benefit the political parties and the individual members of the Senate who are power-hungry politicians. And they don't give a damn if it helps the nation. And they don't give a damn if it creates bitterness and division. In fact, that is one of their goals. Now, when I talk about what's going to happen in this country, what we're going to do, I say we're not going to reform the government. The Tea Party wants to reform the government. Bernie Sanders supporters want to reform the government. Lots of groups think that it can be reformed. It can't be reformed. We're going to destroy it. We're not going to change it. We're going to completely destroy what is currently in place. Now, I don't mean we're going to kill anybody or burn anything. You know that. We're going to politically, absolutely obliterate what currently exists because it's evil and it's harmful to the children and grandchildren and future of the nation. And as we destroy that, we're going to put in place what we are supposed to have. And that is genuine citizen representative self-governance. And one thing that will result is that we will constitutionally, by constitutional rule of law, make our treaties. And yes, it will require work on the part of members of the Senate. They won't have time to campaign for re-election. They won't have time to be fundraising. They will be working very hard doing, among other things, the crafting of necessary treaties. And because it will require 2/3 approval of the Senate, it will represent a fairly substantial consensus of the American public, and we will move ahead in a much more peaceful and unified manner. So there you have it. More civics from Bell Buckle, Tennessee, and more reason to be optimistic. We're going to solve this and our many other problems through political revolution. We are going to, now please say it, join in with me. We're going to overthrow the government. 1, 2, 3. We are going to overthrow the government. Let's try it one more time. 1, 2, 3. We are going to overthrow the government. All right. I feel good. Thank you.